Pick up a game, put it in, and press start. Congratulations, you have experienced choice in a video game. And after that, depending upon the game, choice after choice is offered to you. But rarely are those choices depicted in the same way. Video games, like any story, are often designed for the purpose of escapism, storytelling, or actualization of the creator's emotions. But unlike any other story, they offer the ever unquestionable and unique ability of choice. You can start a movie, you can open a book, and you can turn on a video game, but only one of those lets you choose beyond that first step. Hello, I am the Hearth Guy, and I've been busy working through a laundry list of video games that I've been sitting on in my backlog. Both games I've played before and needed to replay, and those I had never touched before. This was largely spurred on by a lack of available funds, and therefore an opportunity to replay games I already had access to, either to get clips for future videos or to reacquaint myself with the game under my current mindset and standards. During this constant barrage of game after game, I began to think more and more about the games I was playing, what it took to make them, and the design philosophies behind them, and I was recalled to a video idea that I had way back before I posted my first video that I ended up writing. And out of a desire to make something a little less conforming as a countdown list or death battle video, and since my previous video essay did rather well, I've decided to dig up a few of those older script ideas. Some of you have already seen, which I've already published one of those videos talking about the often accidental potential for beauty within video games, and this was the next one on my mind. So, choice in video games. It's a feature that's becoming more and more prevalent as the industry goes on, more than just simple decisions of up and down, side to side, asking certain questions and grabbing certain items. Instead, further complexity has been introduced year after year into the cultural landscape of Western video games. And I do mean to specify that, as it's a habit I don't see as often in Eastern video games like Persona or Xenoblade, which isn't to downplay them. Watch almost any other video of mine and you'll see that I adore and am biased towards Xenoblade Chronicles to a frankly extreme degree, but that's a different subject. Instead, I want to take a look at how the usage of greater player choice has adapted and grown over the decades in video games. And while I'll shout out 2 particular games from Nintendo's library and how they handle choice later, most will be Western games. And to start, I think we should go back 20 years to a game that attempted to replicate free will, and did it in a hilariously binary way. Fable. The original Fable, released in 2004, was somewhat set up as a game that's all about choices. However, in practice, it treated player choice more akin to a set of 2 buttons, one for good and one for bad. Now, binary or black and white morality doesn't inherently discredit a game or its attempts to apply a sort of karma system. However, in the case of Fable, it rarely ever treats you to a complex decision point that acts as a mirror to both the player and the character. The closest it ever gets is at the very end of the base game, where you have the choice of getting rid of a very powerful weapon, or killing your blind sister in order to keep it. The choice does poke at the inherent gamer instinct to get that good loot, but it doesn't do so in a way that actually challenges the player's morality, as it's such a clearly evil decision to keep the sword that who in their right mind would take it unless they were actively trying to be evil. Not to mention, in the expanded versions of the game, you get an equally powerful weapon if you just play a little longer, ultimately rendering the choice irrelevant, further weakening the game's attempt to make any decision feel meaningful. Which is another bigger problem with how Fable approaches choice and morality. No terrible decision carries with it a suitable consequence, nor does its corresponding virtuous decisions carry any real weight. When both choices equate to the same outcome with the game barely acknowledging the difference, it can make the player feel like their choice doesn't actually matter. An excellent video by Strictly Mediocre covered why it's so difficult for us as players to truly commit to an objectively evil playthrough. I'll link to that video in the description. In the video, he comments on how many choice-based games like Fallout 3 and 4 fail to properly encourage or reward evil choices in the same way they make good choices. Essentially, you're never pushed to play as an evil character for any other reason than to see what happens, which is an action by its nature that breaks the immersion of the game. In Fable, this remains true in an inverted way, as most things you'd gain from your evil acts are almost one-to-one with what you would get with the good act. Early on, you can either save a homeless man from a bully, or beat him halfway to death. Similar to the previous choice regarding the sword, the only thing you lose or gain is karma points. The story carries on with no indication that your choice will be recognized by anyone. The lack of weight to these evil choices, as I mentioned before, makes these choices essentially the same thing, and when you realize that, the illusion is broken. To move on to a better example of how choice in video game is done, Dragon Age Origins. BioWare has made a business model on creating games with expansive and dynamic choices and characters set in worlds that will change in response to both. From Origins to Inquisition, every decision you make has some level of a ripple, large or small, excluding a certain choice in Dragon Age 2. The character you play as in Origin is entirely subject to your decisions, as you're placed in a modest position of power. With a horrific apocalypse on the way, you have to gather allies to defend your homeland and save the world. Sounds noble, right? Wrong. A truth that is often overlooked in end-of-the-world stories is how amoral a situation that actually is. Everyone, good or evil, tend to have a vested interest in staying alive. In fact, it's the selfish and evil that are more likely to want to keep living and are less prone to heroic sacrifices. As such, the kinds of people who gather around during the courses of Dragon Age Origins and the choices you make reflect this. You need an army and you're offered the chance to have one made of stone and steel in the form of golems. One problem. Doing so would condemn countless people to having their souls torn out and made to be slaves to whoever was holding their control rod. But if it's in the name of the greater good, do you do it? Alternatively, you need the assistance of the dwarven armies, but they first need to appoint a new king to be able to make such a decision. Do you choose the morally upright but more traditionally conservative and elderly man, who would likely only worsen societal issues plaguing the dwarves? Or do you side with the scummy brother-killing prince who would indeed bring about societal change, but also obliterate any kind of opposition as a tyrant? Both offer the same initial outcome, but the ramifications of the choice echo throughout both this game and the following. Perhaps only in small ways, but it is a grand step forward from Fable. Furthermore, your choices in the way you respond to the people around you also impacts the world you live in. Just as in reality, every decision ripples and affects people across the world years ahead of you. Take Alistair and Loghain, the two most important characters in Origins. One is the Lost Prince and your best friend, and the other is the usurper who betrayed you all the way back at the start of the game. Clearly, when you first get your chance, you're going to cut Loghain's head off and put Alistair on the throne. But that's not the only choice to be made. See, Loghain's daughter, Honora, was married to the previous king and Alistair's half-brother. She has years' worth of experience in ruling, and Alistair has stated numerous times he doesn't much like the idea of kingship. So, perhaps you can put Honora on the throne. You can still kill Loghain, but Alistair would be free to live his life as he's already been living it, but again, there are other choices too. If you spare Loghain, Riordan, a veteran Grey Warden, will offer up the chance for him to be made a Grey Warden, just as you and Alistair are. An act that would force him to atone for his previous betrayal of the Wardens by becoming one. A poetic justice, right? Well, Alistair disagrees. In a moment of anger, he refuses to allow Loghain to be made a Warden, insisting that either Loghain dies or Alistair doesn't become king. And again, the choice to put Honora on the throne makes itself known. In this case, to keep Loghain alive and set Honora on the throne would require Alistair to be either executed or cast out and banished. An even worse fate for someone who's been at your side this entire time. However, with each one, you can see the logic behind these decisions. You can understand the pros and cons and decide for yourself. With that in mind, there are ways to get everything you want out of this. A way for everyone to make it out alive, and with Alistair and Honora on the throne. How? Simple. Far earlier in the story, Alistair will ask to be taken to visit his sister, Guldana, who he's never met. The meeting goes less than stellar. Afterwards, Alistair confronts his emotions about the situation, and you're able to give your input. And that is the important part. If you tell Alistair almost anything, he will remain the same person he's been this entire time. Unprepared and unwilling to serve as king. But if you tell him, rather tactlessly, that many people are out for themselves, he will internalize this lesson and become more pragmatic and serious, developing into someone who is willing to allow Loghain to live for the greater good. And through this, it shows a beautiful potential in video games. Good decisions can lead to bad outcomes, and choices that we would otherwise have difficulty making can lead to moments of incredible heroism. The branching consequences of your choices in Dragon Age is no secret. In fact, it's a famous aspect of almost every BioWare game that has made the studio a big name in the video games industry. However, if there is one downside to the game, it's that its primary weakness in the choices department is that only your choice ever seems to matter. No one else is making a grand decision that affects the story except for you. A similar problem presents itself in games like Fire Emblem Three Houses or Hopes. You make a singular choice near the beginning of the game, and then you're along for the ride. In some ways, this is more accurate to real life, The whole of human history doesn't generally revolve around a single person anyway. But to look at a game that truly masters this, we look to the oft-forgotten gem, triangle strategy. One of the primary mechanics of triangle strategy is the scales of conviction, a set of scales which are used both in-game and by you as a character to direct what decisions the characters make and what direction the story goes in. The system works effectively like this. You are presented with either 2 or 3 options, and you must convince characters with different ideas than you to support what you want to do. With a combination of the right arguments and secret points in specific ideals like utility, liberty, or morality, you can convince a character to support one of the choices and therefore get the outcome you want. But if you choose the wrong argument or don't have enough of the right ideal points, you can just be outright refused by the character, who will choose what they want. Alternatively, you can just do nothing. After all, every time there's a decision, there's usually at least one who is undecided. You can just lean back and let the game make the decision for you. In this, it emphasizes not only your choice, but the choices of the characters, a fact which becomes more and more true as the 3 primary endings and the secret true ending requires you to make decisions that some of your allies will outright leave over. Dragon Age and the Fodlan games have decisions that make certain characters leave, yes, but throughout the game, triangle strategy emphasizes that this is not just your ship that you're steering. If you want to make a decision, you had better be convincing and be set in whatever ideal you're pushing for. If not, tough luck. I find so few games that take this choice when covering choice, and it's my personal favorite. While your choices matter just as much as anyone else's, the choices of the other characters are also treated with equal weight, which further helps create immersion in the world you're playing through. A fact that is further amplified as the choices that you as a collective make can affect said world at large. In conclusion, as video games develop alongside technology and people, the ability of said video games to emulate the most essential aspect of being human, the freedom to choose and suffer the consequences of those choices, will become even grander, I believe. After all, without consequence, there can be no free will. This has been the Hearth Guy, and I am glad that you chose to stick around through this video all the way to the end. I can't tell you how encouraging the response to my video on Accidental Beauty was. So thank you for letting me know that I can make videos like this and still get views and feedback from you. As always, variety content to come. My channel boasts just about anything for anyone, and I'm always reaching out into new formats, genres, and worlds. So if you're interested in something, don't worry. Chances are I'll talk about it eventually. This channel is run by whatever random ideas pops into my head after all. So if that sounds good, like, comment, and subscribe and all that YouTube jazz. I hope to see you all around the hearth again. Thank you and have a great day or night.